Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast. Now, I can't believe in 2024 I still keep reading that people are the weakest link in cybersecurity, but very often businesses simply give people an annual cybersecurity compliance training video to click through that they do in about half an hour and then just forget about for the rest of the year. So a quick question for everybody listening. How do you or how does your workplace educate staff about the importance of cybersecurity? And do you do it in a funny or entertaining way so that information sticks? Well, today's guest spent a year building a cybersecurity and mentalism educational entertainment show, and he's got so many great ideas. He's put security messages inside fortune cookies so that when a board member opens up the fortune cookie after lunch, they read something like, "Today is a great day to increase security budget." And yes, it's gimmicky, but people won't just give you money, but it draws their eyeballs to you, giving you an opportunity to show business value. And there's another great example. I think when increasing password minimum lengths from 8 to 12 characters, yes, you can imagine the fallout that happens. It's probably happened in your workplace too. But he had custom mugs made that made light of the policy change. So when people complained, hey, they got a mug. How can you argue with that? You turn people's objections into a light-hearted moment and giving them an opportunity to tell the story about how you've cracked their password. And people need to be in the right mood to receive that right information. And creating that mood is what he excels at. And his show has been a huge hit in everywhere from Chicago to Phoenix to Warsaw in Poland. So I want to learn more about that, how he's putting security messages in daily life, balancing entertainment and education, and the future directions of cybersecurity education and what that looks like. It's something that impacts each and every one of us. We see it in our headlines every day. There has to be a better way. But enough spoilers from me. It's time for me to ask you to buckle up and hold on tight, because I'm going to beam your ears all the way to Phoenix, where Gary Chan is returning to the podcast once again to share his story that even involves the FBI. And if that's not enough of a teaser to get you in, I don't know what will be. But let's get Gary onto the show now. So a massive warm welcome back to the show. For anyone that missed our last conversation, can you just remind everyone listening with a little about who you are and what you do?
Well, hello, Neil, and thank you for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, my name is Gary Chan, and I'm a security mentalist. I lead a team of 45 cybersecurity specialists to protect hospitals and physician clinics. And when I'm not doing that, I'm performing security mentalism shows to entertain and educate audiences on social engineering. I'm trained in behavioral profiling, conflict management, negotiation, interrogation, and mediation. I hold 4 security certifications and a degree in electrical engineering and computer science from MIT.
And on this podcast, I get to hear so many different incredibly cool job titles, but I think you've just trumped it now. Security mentalist, that is the coolest job title I've heard. You must get a kick out when you go through passport control or something, if everyone asks you your job title.
I just write IT. Because when I want people to ask questions, and I don't want TSA asking questions, but when I want people asking questions, I say security mentalist, and that usually gets a lot of, what's that? A lot of heads turn, and that's why I created it. It's actually a really fun story how it came about, but that may be another day.
Oh man, it sounds like I'm gonna have to get you back on to talk about that. And I know what you mean about going through there, because it was about 5 years ago when I went through, and in the US they can be quite particular, and that they asked me what I did for a living. At the time, I was doing a lot of ghostwriting for CEOs and stuff, which I still do now. But when I explained I was a ghostwriter, there was just a blank look on their face. I ended up going to a room somewhere, and I had to explain it. And in the end, they just said, "So you make other people look good." And we reached an agreement and went our separate ways. But I mean, for you and me, we last spoke 3 years ago. And since then, you've created a cybersecurity and mentalism show that has been such a hit across various cities. So I've got to ask, so much has changed since we spoke. What inspired you to blend these two seemingly different worlds, and how did you develop this unique concept?
Sure. Well, before that, I was just doing straight up cybersecurity. I was also doing straight up just mentalism for entertainment, like magic and stuff like that. And one day the FBI asked me whether I would be able to do like some magic or mentalism or something like that for one of their events, because they wanted somebody that they knew, and they knew me, and they're like, hey, you do this sort of thing. But they said, hey, Gary, can you make it really relevant for our people? And I was like, magic for FBI? I don't think that's a specialty. So I declined because I didn't want to look like a fool, right? In front of a bunch of people. And then they asked me a few years later, so then I developed. I said, okay, fine. Let me try to develop something. So what I came up with was, why don't I do an interrogation themed show where I show how an FBI agent, in my own, mind, and, based on what I've seen, which may or may not be accurate because I'm not actually an FBI agent. But I said, this is how an FBI agent would do, an interrogation. And I said, this is how a mentalist would do an interrogation. And people, they loved it. I mean, after they're like, wow, Gary, this is really good. We actually want to use some of this stuff. Can you do more? And of course, I thought it was a one-hit wonder. But when COVID came about, I was thinking, I can't do any more shows. No one's hiring anybody during COVID. And so I thought, well, if I were to reimagine what I do, what would it be? So I spent actually a year and a half creating a completely new show that was security themed, and that really incorporated a lot of the elements that I thought that these guys liked. And then just created a new show, and I did it, and people have just loved it. So I've been iterating since that point, but it actually came about because the FBI asked me about it. So it was funny.
What a great story. Please tell me, were you brave enough to wear Ray-Bans for your talk there, the stereotypical FBI look?
Yeah, and then you have to wear your jacket, right? And then have this, deadpan look.
Yeah.
Those guys are pretty warm. They're all really actually smiling and all that when they're not like, on the job and trying to act all serious and stuff.
Oh, brilliant story. And of course, your shows have garnered attention in multiple cities and from many well-known brands as well. So can you share maybe how the audience has responded to this novel way of learning about IT security, and what impact you've seen it have on their understanding of cybersecurity? Because I love what you do here, because every day on this podcast, I try and put tech in a language that everyone can understand. And this is exactly what you're doing. You're making it fun. But I'm interested in how the audiences have responded to this.
Yeah, so they've responded really well to it. And I would say that there's actually more than one audience. And I'll explain what I mean in a moment. So first off, there's the audience itself, the people who are watching it, and they just love it, right? Because they're thinking, they're going in, they're getting entertainment, but they're also getting education. And what I'm told is, like, it blows up the Slack channel of the company, if it's a company event or whatever it is, because it gets people talking about social engineering for days on coming, right? Which is exactly what you want, right? And more importantly, they go home and they tell their family and friends that they got to go watch cybersecurity awareness, which it's just mind-boggling to me. Yeah. So the audience themselves just really enjoy the show. But then you've also got companies and conferences, and the companies tell me like just how much of an impact that has made. Like it really when their people for regular security awareness go and talk with the people about, hey, maybe this is a better way of, checking your emails for, phishing or whatever. They're a lot more receptive, because what I really try to do in my show is to show people how easy it is to really just trick people, people who are very, very intelligent people and good at what they do. But the point is if you've got someone who's really good at their job, working 40 hours a week doing that, they're going to be better than you if you're not specialized in it, right? So if they're spending 40 hours a week trying to trick you to click on that phishing link, there are so many advanced techniques that they can use that people just aren't aware of. And that's what I try to expose, is I really try to show people, hey, this is what can happen to really, really smart people. And I think getting that point across helps those companies then follow up with more training, so that people are like, hey, this is actually good stuff. Like, I actually can learn something here, as opposed to, oh, I already know all of this, right? So you've got that from the company response. And then, of course, conferences, they're looking to get people engaged. They want a speaker who's going to get people energized and excited. And you can do that on stage by being really engaging and bringing people up on stage as opposed to talking at them, right? So that's something that those conference organizers really like. So I would say it really, really just hits the mark on all the different points, from the audience themselves to the company or the conference that's trying to, that's asking for the show.
And before you came on the podcast today, I recently watched your unlisted video about vishing. So can you expand on what that is for anyone that doesn't know, and also elaborate on how you use routines like this to educate people about specific cybersecurity threats, like the huge one last year at Caesars and MGM with the breaches there, which hit the headlines all around the world. Is there anything you can share on that too?
Sure. So what I typically do is I take the latest news. So in the example of MGM and Caesars, unfortunately, some people had called in and pretended to be someone else. So my understanding is that there was vishing involved. Vishing is the fraudulent use of phone calls. And so what I did was I created a mentalism routine around it by essentially talking the audience through, these are all this is what someone does during a vish, right? You go through background review, and you've got all these things, all these tools, these open source intelligence tools that you can do to do research on the company and on the people. And I really show a lot of things that I think the average person, even some cyber people, really didn't even know existed. So it really piques their interest to say, wow, you've got all of these things that you can do to do research on me and on my company, right? Because they personalize it a little bit. And then I say, okay, so that's what you can do. And then on top of that, during the phone call, you can do all sorts of things, right? You can mimic using AI to synthesize someone else's voice. You can pretend to be somebody else. You can use emotions, like trying to cause people to feel embarrassed so that they are more likely to do what you want them to do. So I talk about a lot of different techniques that you can use during a vishing call. And then we bring on somebody on stage and have them dial a random number, and I just try to vish the guy real time, whoever it is. And the point is that, whatever information I'm able to get out from them, right? The point is that it's definitely possible to be able to do things like that. And I think the education to help people understand and have the awareness, I try not to teach exactly all of the exact techniques that are used, because I don't want people actually doing it, but I do want them to have awareness. So they actually do see like some screenshots of things. We do go through some pretty specific examples, but get people to really understand that it can be done to them. And then I do it live to somebody random and then just see what happens. And usually I'm able to get something pretty cool out from that conversation.
Oh, I absolutely love that. And something else I love about what you're doing here is I think it's 7 years since I left the corporate world of IT behind, and I remember quite fondly and not so fondly that once a year compulsory compliance training for all members of staff, where they had to just pretty much click next for about 32 slides, and hey, you're cybersecurity compliant for the next 12 months. And of course, that is no way to do things. And one of the things that really stands out for me, again, is how you make it fun, but also put security messages into our daily lives. So, forget me if I'm wrong, but I think you mentioned putting security messages in fortune cookies, creating custom mugs for password policy changes. So again, this will be setting off light bulb moments for a lot of business leaders listening. So how have you seen these creative strategies draw better attention to important security messages in a corporate setting and deliver that message that IT and security teams are so desperate for the whole business to recognize and understand?
So I'll give you an example before I specifically answer your question. So with the fortune cookies, what I did was you can actually go to these custom fortune cookie companies, and there's actually a couple that create some fantastic fortune cookies. I could just eat them all day. But anyway, you can put whatever fortune, you can write your own message, and they'll actually like bake them and then mail them to you, right? So imagine this, because this is like an example of what I do. Imagine this: if there's like a board meeting and then people are, having lunch, right? And they're having Chinese, right? And so I drop off a fortune cookie for each person. Imagine whenever they're surprised when the CFO opens it, cracks it open and says, and it reads it and says, "Today is a great day to increase the security budget." It's just fun. It's engaging. People they just like it, right? Like it's a good joke, but it does have a psychological impact. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make security really fun at the office, or for the audiences or whatever it is, so that it keeps security top of mind, because you want people inviting you to the table, because they're not inviting the security guy to the table anymore. They're inviting Gary, the guy I really like, to the table. And then now as Gary, I can, push a security agenda. And that's what it's about. It's about really making security fun, making it so people want you in the room. And so you can do all sorts of stuff. And if you want, I'll talk about the custom mug too, but I know you're also on a time limit.
No, not at all. I'd love to hear that.
So in this particular company, they wanted to increase the passwords length from 8 characters to 12 characters. Now you can imagine the general. You can imagine generally that people aren't going to like this. Right? Yeah. With more things for me to remember. And so what we did was we put together these custom mugs that said, at this company, we use 8, and then I crossed it out and put 12 letters for our security or something like that. It was something like that. And it also had a little puzzle within that that actually nobody solved yet. It's been a few years. But anyway, what happens is I pass these all out. And the idea was, if someone complains, right? So when someone says, hey, this is ridiculous. Why are we using 12 character passwords? Whatever, right? Like most of the time, security people will respond back and say, well, if you have 8 characters, we can crack it in a few hours using a laptop. You've already lost them. They don't care. And so when they start complaining, all you do is you pick up the mug, you shove it at them, and you say, hey, have a mug. I mean, what do you do with that? I mean, what? And then you read it, and it's like, you laugh at it, and then you already forgot why you were in the room complaining. Yeah. And then at this point, you just brain hijack them, and then the cybersecurity guy can follow up with, by the way, the reason that we're doing this is, and the guy is like, hey, I just got a free mug. I'll listen. It's fine. I'll listen. And then you can have that conversation. So I find that really doing things like this that interrupt the flow, the way that people normally think, is incredibly helpful. And that's what I do during the show. That's what I do just in general to make sure that people are really paying attention, because otherwise you're just going through the motions and it's kind of pointless.
So when you're creating these entertaining yet educational experiences, how do you find that balance by getting the fun elements with the need to convey that serious and sometimes complex cybersecurity concept? Because I would imagine it's quite a tricky balance.
I would say that it's really trial and error. So it's through experience. At this point, I've been doing magic and mentalism for 25 years. People coming on stage, or me doing things, and so I kind of have an idea of what's going on. And then doing cybersecurity for a couple of decades as well. So I think it's really just doing those trials. Sometimes they fall flat, and that's okay, right? It's only one person, so don't go on stage and do it for 500 people on your first try. Do it for one person. See what the reaction is, do it for a few more, and you can build up your repertoire. So at this point, I've got a repertoire of stuff that still people that I typically work with haven't seen the full amount yet. So I just build them up over time.
And your security awareness keynote using mentalism has become so popular at conferences and corporate events. So what are the key elements, do you think, that make it so effective and appealing to these audiences of hundreds, if not thousands, that you stand in front of?
I think the key thing for people to remember is that there are actually 2 people that you care about, right? Or 2 groups of people. One is the audience, which is the one that you mentioned, and the other one is actually the conference organizer. So I think the attendees is really obvious to an extent, which is keep it engaging, keep it fun, keep people talking about you. You want them to go home and tell their family and friends about it, whatever it is they've learned. But really, the conference organizer is, I think, the person or group of people that a lot of people forget about. because the reason, and they're the ones that actually decide who should be on stage, right? So they're actually in a way more important. And I would say a couple of things. One is the impact that you have, and the other is how easy it is you are to work with, right? So the impact that you have, what they want is they want more people at their event. And so if they can bring you on and they know that you have a reputation and that people might come because of you, that's great. Those are like celebrity type people. If they know that bringing you on will really get people talking about their show even for the next year so that they get more entrants, right? That's what I try to do. Try to make sure that those people really go home and with something. So I like have magic kits and all these other things that they bring home and they talk about it. Then they know that the next year they actually have more people coming to their event, which is, what they want. And so that's super important to them, is the long-term impact for their business. And then the second thing that I mentioned was how easy it is for you to work with you. And so, for example, what I do is I actually have a packet, through the time that I've been doing this, I've been jotting down questions that people have asked me, and then I actually have answers for them. So like I have an FAQ, I have stage diagrams, I have pictures, I have, documentation. I have a whole bunch of stuff to where when someone says, "Hey, Gary, can you do a show?" I say, "Yes, I can. By the way, here's my packet. Here are the answers to all the questions that you're ever going to ask me." And, of course, I can walk them through it if they want it. But the point is that you show them that you've done it before. You know what it is that they care about. And I've got a checklist, like, here's the equipment I list. You just tell me which are the ones you have, which are the ones that you want me to bring, right? And so this way, it's not like a brand new conversation with a speaker who's just going to say, "Well, what do you want me to do?" And, it's actually just make it super easy for them. And so now on the conference organizing their side, they're like, "Oh, I can just hire this guy. It's a turnkey. He knows what he's doing. He'll show up on time. He'll give me what I need." And then people go home happy. I'm good.
Love it. And outside of the workplace and outside of these conference halls, you've also mentioned that there's a huge demand for cybersecurity materials for families, and leading to the creation of resources for them too. So how do you tailor cybersecurity education to be accessible and engaging to people outside of the context of work in their homes? And we've got families of all ages there with different levels of understanding of cybersecurity.
Yeah. So imagine this. Imagine that people go home and they're like, "Hey, we got to go buy tickets to go watch this guy on a Friday night after dinner." Yeah. Like that's what I'm trying to do with my show. And I also want people to go home and talk about it, right? So I was actually featured at the Chicago Magic Lounge this past summer, where people would come have dinner and will watch me do things like guess people's passwords, right? So that's like this is sort of real stuff. And what I do is I try to keep it super engaging that they can bring home too. So not only the stories that they can talk about, "Hey, I saw this guy go on stage," or if they were the volunteer themselves that went on stage and this thing happened, rather than just telling a story, I let them bring home something. So I have these magic kits that I have two types. One is for one with children, and one is for just strictly adults, right? And so if they're a family, you want to bring home some magic to your kids. I mean, what kid doesn't like magic?
Yeah.
So you can bring that home and you can have that conversation with your child, right? You can go through these little games and these little sort of things. And it's not necessarily tied to cyber, because I think depending upon the age, it might be a little too young for cyber. But the point is if you can play with these things and you get the idea that you can be tricked, that things are illusory, that it's not always what it seems, that these are the things that the children are going to take away. And that's what you want. And it creates that engagement where the parent gets to spend time with the child, which is what they want to do, right? So why not do some magic rather than read a book at night? And then for the adults, there's a lot more, I would say, slightly more sophisticated things where it's, you've got, as an example, I've got this one little thing where it creates a sort of sound. And the idea is that you're tricking people into hearing things or believing that the sound is being made by a certain thing when it really isn't. And so when people go home and they play with this, and then they do it with an adult, and they like, wow, I can actually trick somebody on something so simple. well, I just did it. Imagine someone else who has been doing this for a long time. Imagine what they could do. So now it gets them thinking about, because I really, I surround this with a lot of cybersecurity, like social engineering, these sort of things. Then they can make that personal connection and say, wow, I just learned how to do something really simple by tricking, the senses of sound. Someone can certainly dish me, right? Mm-hmm. If they can do something like that, I imagine what they could do. So I try to keep it really engaging and something that is just slightly outside of what people have typically seen or done or used before, but still simple enough to where you can just pick it up and pretty much go with, a few sentences of instruction.
Well, we are at that time of the year, the beginning of a year where everything feels a little bit magical. We want to do things differently. We start planning for the year ahead. I suspect you've been doing lots of this. So given your success in your unique approach to cybersecurity education, where do you go from here? What future directions or developments do you envision for making cybersecurity more accessible and more engaging for that wider audience? Because I got a feeling you would have been thinking about a lot of this stuff over the holidays.
Oh, yeah. No, I always love exploring new ideas. So one idea that I was exploring with a client was creating an illusions gallery before the show. Mm-hmm. So the idea is to, go up to a table and you can see all sorts of these different illusions of things that people know is not real, but yet it still looks real. So there's an idea. There's going to be a board game coming out later that that someone else that I know is creating that I'll actually be a character in. So more on that at some point. It's called Masters to Mythics. And then, I don't know, maybe a Netflix series. I'm kidding. So what I'd love to do, though, is I'd love to do a keynote for like a video game conference, because I love video games because it's just a lot of fun. And it's just something I've enjoyed since being a child. But, I don't know. It's early in the year. I have a bunch of ideas and I'm just enjoying the journey and kind of seeing where it goes.
Well, I'd love to see if we can try and manifest some of that for you, see if we can make something happen, because some of the biggest names in business, VC funding and tech have either been guests or listened to these podcasts. So if there was one person out there listening to this show that you could have a private breakfast or lunch with, who would it be and why? Because he or she might just get to hear this. It'd be great to get that message out there and see what we can manifest together. So who would it be?
Well, I would love to meet Andy Greenberg. So he's a technology journalist who covers cybersecurity for Wired magazine. Yeah. And he's written a couple of books that I really like Sandworm and Tracers in the Dark. And I just really love to hear how he goes about his work as a journalist, not the cybersecurity parts, but just his work as a journalist. Because I've got to imagine that it's somewhat dangerous, it's some of this work that he has to do. And I'd be curious how he does his research, what open source intelligence he uses, or maybe he's got a lot of different contacts. I don't need to know who the contacts are, but just generally, how does he go about doing it? Because that's super fascinating to me. And I'd love to meet Andy Greenberg.
Awesome. Well, we'll throw that out into the universe, into the ether. Let's see what we can manifest here. Hopefully Andy will get to hear this and will just let me know if anything does come from it. But before I let you go, for anyone listening, maybe you want to check some videos of you in action, see some of the work that you're doing, or just reach out and contact you. Where would you like to point everyone listening?
Sure. So my name is Gary S. Chan. I put the S initial in the middle just to differentiate me from the other thousands of Gary Chans out there. But my website is www.gschan2000.com. And my email address is mentalist@gschan2000.com, or you can just search for Gary Chan, Security Mentalist, and I'll pop right up. So that's the best way to reach out to me. I do have some videos on my website of just some fun things, but I actually have some more videos for those of who are interested in seeing a little bit more, or potentially interested in some sort of keynote.
Awesome. Well, when I publish it on my website too, techblogwriter.co.uk, under podcast, I'll include a video on there as well so people can see you in action. I'll take one off your website, of course, not the unlisted one that you showed me previously. And I know what you mean about calling yourself Gary S. Chan now. I mean, you'd think Neil Hughes is not a popular name, but there's another tech writer out there called Neil Hughes, so I had to go with Neil C. Hughes. And even now, we still get each other's emails and email pictures and stuff. So I know the importance of sticking that initial in there. But I just love everything that you're doing here and how you've spent more than a year building cybersecurity plus mentalism educational entertainment show. And as a result, I'll need to highlight here, it's been a huge hit with audiences everywhere, from Chicago to Milwaukee to Phoenix, St. Louis, to even Poland. So I'd love to stay in touch with you, see how this evolves. But just a big thank you for sharing your story again today. It's a pleasure to have you back on. And we won't leave it 3 years until we get to speak again, I hope.
Oh, well, thanks so much, Neil. I hope so too.
What an incredibly cool guy. Absolutely love what he's doing here. We all know that problem with cybersecurity education. Nobody cares in the real world. If your phone just remembers your password, nobody wants to create unique passwords. There's so many different dangers around vishing and phishing, but the average user is blissfully unaware for the large part. So I love what he's doing here, Gary, with his shows and doing simple things like putting security messages in fortune cookies, creating custom mugs for password policy changes. And it was great hearing how these creative strategies will help drawing attention to those important security messages in a corporate setting. But I'd love to hear how you're tackling this issue. So please email me now, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, just at Neil C. Hughes. Let's keep this conversation going. I'm very interested in the fun and educational ways that you're spreading this message throughout your workplace. Let me know what works, what didn't work, and everything in between. Other than that, I also invite you to join me again tomorrow. We'll explore another topic. But thank you for listening today, and until next time, don't be a stranger.